On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we have a fire breakout on board the car carrier Delphine in the port of Zeebrugge in Belgium. At the same time, the NTSB just released a report on the car fire on board the Grand Costa in Newark back in July of 2023. Do we have a tale of two ship fires? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano, and welcome to today's episode. So two big reports come out here. Fire on board Delphine in Belgium, and then this National Transportation Safety Board interim report comes out regarding the fire on board Grand Costa. We're going to take a look at both of these and understand how a vehicle fire went so well on board Delphine, but ended so tragically on board Grand Costa. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Here are the two stories on G-Captain this week. Fire broke out Wednesday afternoon aboard a car carrier reportedly carrying 110 electrical vehicles. The blaze originated on one of the cargo decks. We know it's on deck 3 of the Delphine. According to Zeebrugge Major Dirk de Fa, that's a great Belgian name. I'm going to go right there. Dirk de Fa is not just a Belgian name. I'm going to put that up there with a Clive Cussler, either hero or villain, not sure. The full extent of the fire remained unclear as of Wednesday evening. I will note that on Friday, the crews have been able to enter into the deck, and we're going to talk about that. Emergency response teams immediately implemented safety protocols, including evacuating the crew and activating the ship's automatic firefighting system. Tugboats were deployed to contain the fire, while federal police established a security perimeter around the affected areas. This is the image we have of the ship with firefighting boats. These are local tugs on area, spraying water onto that third deck to cool the deck. This vessel, in particular, really unique vessel, has a hybrid propulsion system, both a main diesel engine plus electric power, and including two massive sail rotors that were installed on the vessel. On that third deck was a mix of electrical vehicles and internal combustion engines, and we're going to come back to that. Coincidentally, we had this report also from G-Captain. New Jersey firefighters who responded to a July 2023 fire aboard a RoRo cargo ship at Port of Newark lacked adequate training in responding to shipboard fires, according to the conclusions of the National Transportation Safety Board inspection. The fire on the Grand Costa, owned and operated by Grimaldi Group, broke out as longshoremen were loading used vehicles for export to West Africa. 2 firemen died after they became disoriented in poor visibility below decks and were trapped in tight spaces between cars. The NTSB staff's conclusions and recommendations were approved by the agency's board in a public hearing on Tuesday and included a call for better training and familiarization with shipboard environments for land-based firefighters. In addition to firefighting training, the NTSB also found fault with the design of one of the ship's large hydraulic garage doors, with the vehicle used by the port operator to push non-operating cars onto the vessel. So here we are, tale of two fires. One fire takes place in July 2023 in the United States, and 2 Newark firefighters died. Meanwhile, over in Belgium, we have a car fire happen on board a vessel, and here we have a complete opposite result. Why was there 2 different outcomes? If you want an excellent breakdown of the fire on board the Delphine, head on over to Stash D Training. That's Patrick Durham, good buddy, friend of the show. He has a great video where he breaks this down. He is a career firefighter, well trained in electrical vehicle fires. Now, I myself, besides being a former merchant mariner who underwent training on both the U.S. Navy's basic and advanced firefighting courses, their damage controls courses, I am also a former paid firefighter, and I have been a current volunteer firefighter for 20 years, captain on my volunteer fire department. So I fight car fires quite frequently, including electrical car fires. So let's break this down and compare the two. What happened that led to the loss of 2 firefighter lives, and why did things go so much differently in Belgium? So what we know about this fire is it started on the third deck of Delphine. On board there were about 100 vehicles, 60 electrical vehicles and 40 internal combustion engine vehicles, or ICE vehicles. Now, everybody has their issues about electrical vehicles. Let me give you my perspective about electrical vehicles. Electrical vehicles very rarely catch on fire. They tend to be extremely safer than an internal combustion. In other words, the chance of a fire in a vehicle that's an EV versus an ICE is much less. However, When an electrical vehicle burns, it burns hotter and longer, and it's nearly impossible to put out. That is the problem with an EV. When EVs catch fire, because of the nature of their batteries, the lithium-ion batteries, and the fact that the batteries give off oxygen, they're oxidizers. And you can't put them out. You can literally submerge them in water and they're still going to keep burning. So once an EV fire begins, they're really difficult to get out. The problem you have on board ship is how these vehicles are packed on board ships. So inside vehicle carriers, whether it's a pure car carrier, a pure car and truck carrier, a roll-on, roll-off ship, a ferry of some kind, you are packing vehicles as close to bumper as you can get door to door. What you want to avoid is what's called broken stowage. That is the space between cargo. You want to bring and maximize as many vehicles as you can on board. This is what got the crew in New Jersey in such trouble, because you really can't maneuver between these vehicles. They have nylon straps on them to hold them into place, and when you bring these vehicles on board, it is just a very densely packed environment. When you walk through a car carrier, a RoRo of any kind, you will see just what I mean. It is very difficult to maneuver inside those areas. The decks are low, very tight, constrained areas to move around. That's what makes the fire in Belgium so unique. So at about 1500 hours, 3 in the afternoon, the fire broke out on board a Delphine. The captain opted to fully evacuate the ship's 26-member crew, but he himself stayed aboard to coordinate with firefighters and other first responders. 4 firefighting tugs arrived on scene to provide cooling water on the starboard side. The master ordered the space closed off and the CO2 fixed firefighting system activated. Now, this fire suppression system works by knocking oxygen out of the atmosphere. Hang on a second, Sal. You just told me that lithium-ion batteries don't need oxygen to burn. That is true. However, what will continue to burn inside the ship will be the lithium-ion batteries. However, the cars themselves, particularly the adjoining cars, the internal combustion cars, will not be able to ignite because of the low oxygen that's in there. However, you got to make sure that the heat radiating from the lithium-ion batteries does not go to the deck above or below, in which case this is why you have tugs on scene to provide the fire suppression. The key here is coordinating with the shore-based fire department and the ship's crew. What you have to be aware of is you cannot open up these compartments for fresh air. According to the head of the fire brigade in the port of Zeebrugge, the vehicles are no longer burning, but as soon as fresh air comes onto the deck, we will have a resurgence. We have to avoid that. For that reason, we will blow nitrogen into the deck that we will have brought over from Antwerp. Although it is still not certain that the situation will be under control, the responders believe that the 60-70 vehicles in the hold have burned out, but the full extent of the damage is not known. So what they're doing here, according to this report, is they flooded the compartment with CO2. Now understand, to do that, you have to seal the deck. You have to make the deck airtight. Now, roll-on, roll-off carriers has huge ventilation systems. These ventilation systems are designed so that when you start the internal combustion engines and you're emitting carbon monoxide, you don't kill the stevedores driving the vehicles on and off. So you have these huge ventilation fans that vent up off the top main deck. Now, there are basically heat elements in them. When they heat up, they will close the dampers, but you can manually shut the dampers. And so what they would have done, in this case, the ship's crew who's familiar with this system, is they would have shut the dampers, sealed the ventilation to the deck. They would have sealed all the hatches to the deck, so the ramps, any of the water and airtight doors would have been sealed, and then they would have started releasing CO2 into the system. On board ship, you have banks of CO2 cylinders, and you have configuration and systems in place that allow you to flood zones of the ship. So in other words, you can identify usually individual or double decks of a ship, seal them off, and then flood them with CO2. That CO2 is both a cooling agent, it's very cold, but more importantly, it displaces oxygen. And what you're doing there is lowering the oxygen levels so that combustion cannot exist. Again, you can't put out the lithium-ion batteries. However, what you're doing here is allowing the lithium-ion with their thermal runaways to run their course, and you're containing the fire. I have to be clear. This is exactly opposite to what terrestrial land-based firefighters want to do. Land-based firefighters want to get in and fight the fire. They want to put the wet stuff on the red stuff. They don't understand the concept of securing and basically surrounding and drowning a compartment like this. But in a steel vessel, this is exactly what you need to do. You need to shut this down and close it off. So we have this report from Belgium. The original post on Friday morning at April 18th at 10 a.m., the fire brigade started ventilating the Delphine. This was done in collaboration with the shipping company CLDN and in consultation with other authorities. Note, again, what they did is they flooded that compartment with CO2, and then they were pumping nitrogen into it. At first glance, the major damage is limited to the load of a compartment with 190 cars, 60 of which are electric. The burning of the batteries created enormous heat. On Thursday, April 17th, firefighters determined that there was still a temperature present, so the risk of resurgence remained. Therefore, the doors were kept closed and no fresh oxygen could flow in. Zeebrugge on Friday morning, a start was made with the careful opening of the hold of the Delphine, in which the fire raged on Wednesday, April 16th. This is done cautiously because there is still a chance of the fire flaring up. Firefighting boat is on standby. Then on April 19th at 1400 hours, the fire was considered extinguished. Quote, "From tonight, the security will be taken over by a private fire brigade," said the spokesman for the local fire brigade, Major Jerome Bonte. "The cars are still on board and will not be taken off the ship until after the weekend." So I will argue nearly a textbook execution of putting out a fire in Belgium. And one of the reasons is we have seen a lot of documentation and a lot of training come out regarding this. So for example, this pamphlet, Fire Response High-Level Guidelines on Vehicle Carrier Safety Form, this comes out from the International Chamber of Shipping. The scope of this guideline includes fire response for the internal combustion engine and vehicles fully or partially powered by lithium-ion batteries. So again, the focus here is on EVs. And one of the big things they note here is this: in the response time, if the initial response does not have a fire under control within 10 to 15 minutes of the first alarm, then use of fixed firefighting systems is recommended. Even a ship in port has very limited resources on board to fight that fire in terms of ship's crew. You're bringing in land-based fire crews who may be familiar or not familiar, as we saw in New Jersey, with firefighting. But the most important thing is the way to fight this fire, whether tied up to the dock or at sea, is to secure the compartment and use the fixed firefighting system, and then do cooling to prevent the spread of that fire beyond the initial fire deck. While this is a very brief guideline, I have to say it is packed with excellent information. So for example, a port operations response plan. Fires in ports require a modified response. Port operations plans should consider several factors, ensuring that third parties are quickly, safely evacuated from the vessel. It will be necessary to liaison with stevedores. The time it may take for the vessel to be cleared of third parties. Times for doors and ramps to be secured in order to segregate fire zones. It is absolutely essential that you shut doors and be able to do it. We're going to come back to that with the New Jersey fire. Consideration should be given to liaisoning with local fire services in ports that are regularly visited. Where multiple operators visit a port, it may be beneficial for all operators to work with the local fire service to establish a policy. I mean, this is basic guidelines they're talking about here. You need to be able to work with the local fire departments. And in the case of this in Belgium, you're dealing with different languages on board because of ships coming in with different crews. This is a really interesting way to deal with this. And I think what we saw happen here was a very important element that must be remembered. The other thing here is they talk about what happens when the fire is out. So fires which have been brought under control, there is a risk that fires which have been brought under control may reignite, what we call putting, again, a reflash or a safety watch on it. Vessel operators should develop policies and procedures to monitor the situation when a fire is controlled. Where a fire on board has been brought under control, the vessel operator should seek expert advice on how to maintain control. Again, you had the situation where you had the local fire brigade that came in, and then they're bringing in a private fire brigade, a salvage team, to come in. They talk about the vapor cloud. A vapor cloud is produced when the battery in an EV goes into thermal runaway. It is generally accepted that the vapor cloud is both explosive and toxic in nature. Hydrogen gas can also be emitted by traditional 12-volt car batteries. Boil off of fuel in ICE vehicles may also result in a vapor cloud. Just because the fire is out, you now may have an explosive limited environment. So one of the things they talked about in one of the early reports here is after using the CO2, and you will use all your CO2, even though you have a lot of those bottles on the ship, believe it or not, you will deplete that bank very quickly. They were bringing in nitrogen to pump nitrogen into the atmosphere to ensure they could displace it. Then they're going to have to properly ventilate out that compartment to avoid a potential vapor explosion. So what happened in Belgium was how it should take place. Compare that to what happened in New Jersey. So the fire took place on Grand Costa d'Avorio over in Newark is such a tragedy. I can't even, it kills me that we lost 2 firefighters on this. So the vessel was loading vehicles to take over to West Africa. These vehicles were basically totaled in the U.S. or no longer viable for sale in the U.S., so they're going to West Africa. According to the NTSB, and this is from their hearing on Tuesday, their conclusions and recommendations were approved by the agency, and what they included is a call for better training and familiarization with shipboard environments for land-based firefighters. In addition, the NTSB found fault with the design of the ship in that one of the ship's large hydraulic garage doors, and you can actually see it here in the image, you can see the black smoke here emanating from this ramp here. This large garage door is open on the vessel, that they are unable to shut this vehicle door, which means that when they sealed the compartment and flooded it with CO2, which they did on board Grand Costa d'Avorio, they cannot get a complete seal, and instead most of the carbon dioxide would eventually vent out here through the upper deck. Because the certification agency, RENA, did not require operator controls outside the doors, they were unable to do it. They would have to go inside the vessel to actually shut those garage doors, so they weren't able to do it. The NTSB also said in the hearing that officials told investigators at the hearings that few, if any, of the firefighters, captains, and chiefs who responded to the incident had any training on shipboard fires or had even been on a large ship at all. This included the members of the land-based engine company trained to operate Newark Department's 53-foot fireboat, who responded with their engine on land as the boat was out of service this evening. The fireboat you see there is New York City's fireboat that is providing some suppression at the time. It was only when the New York Fire Department arrived with their 140-foot fireboat and a complement of Marine firefighters late in the evening that expertise on shipboard firefighting made it to the scene. As Newark's deputy chief and on-scene incident commander said at the 2024 hearing, this is the hearing they had last year, quote, "A member from the Marine Division came over to me. He was pretty much just educating me because I really had no knowledge of how to do stuff with this boat." I can't even process this. I mean, you have the exact opposite that took place in Newark in 2023 versus what we just saw happen in Belgium in 2025. And again, all they had to do was get into a defensive stance. These are old vehicles, total vehicles. The ship itself, it's a Grimaldi ship. Grimaldi ships have a notorious history of burning, not kidding. We've seen this happen at least a half a dozen times. There is no reason that Newark Fire Department firefighters should have been risking their lives to save junk. The Seattle rule: you save a little to save a little, you risk a lot to save a lot. You don't risk your life to save old vehicles. And unfortunately, what happened is 2 of the firefighters tried to stretch hoses into the interior of this vessel. They got hung up, pinned between vehicles, and they couldn't get out. The story continues. The NTSB investigators faulted the Newark's chiefs for sending firefighters into the fire zone on the ship, which had been flooded with CO2 by the ship's crew. Sending the firemen below decks not only put them in danger, they actually weren't going below decks, they were above decks, according to the NTSB, but also exasperated the fire as sealed doors were open for access to run hose lines, allowing CO2 to escape, contrary to marine firefighting best practices. The investigators said firefighters should have focused on cooling the perimeter, attempting to seal compartment and allow the CO2 to work. The investigators did not find fault with the response of the Italian-flagged ship's crew who fought the fire with shipboard equipment, shut down the ventilation systems, and flooded fire compartments with CO2. The NTSB did find that firefighting efforts were hampered by the inability to close the large hydraulic garage door connecting the car store to the ship's weather deck, which allowed the CO2 to escape. The controls for the door were located inside the compartment, and a crew member would have to exit through the smoke and fire area after closing it. RENA, this is the certification agency for Grand Costa d'Avorio, took the view that because the door was closed while the ship was underway, controls did not need to be located outside the compartment, but the NTSB argues in the report that a correct reading of this safety of life at sea SOLAS regulations would mandate the ability to close the door from the outside. The Grand Costa d'Avorio fire really just rips at my gut when I look at it. I have to tell you that after that fire took place, within that night and a few days afterwards, I was talking with fire departments up in the area doing crash courses via Zoom on what to do in case of a fire and get the terrestrial land-based firefighters out of the concept of wanting to go in and fight that fire and get into a concept that if they could not get to the fire immediately and put it out, to seal the compartments, lock it down, and use the fixed firefighting systems on board to suppress the fire, and then get defensive and call in salvage experts, call in marine firefighting experts. The NTSB staff said some of the recommendations in the report are already being implemented. Ports America is no longer using passenger vehicles as pushers. I still can't believe that was being done. Grimaldi Group has modified its roll-on, roll-off vessels so the hydraulic doors can be closed from the outside. Training efforts may still be a work in progress. The Port Authority of New York, New Jersey Director Beth Rooney, a friend of mine, I actually know Beth very well. We actually went to the State University of New York Maritime College together at a recent 2025 State of the Port event that the authority had worked with local first responders to provide classroom and shipboard firefighting training to 1,300 local first responders in 2024, with a lot more to come. I think we need to be doing more. Secretary Duffy, the Secretary of Transportation, how about we get that training ship sitting up at Fort Schuyler, bring it down to the Port of New York, New Jersey, and let's do some firefighting training for the crews on board. I think we should be doing much more to give those firefighters more practical experience in ports around the United States. We're going to have 5 of these national maritime security vessels. Why not bring them into some ports and let's use them for backdrops? The NTSB staff said at Tuesday's hearing that so far Newark firefighters had only been required to complete, just again kills me, a 4-hour online familiarization class, which the NTSB board chair called inadequate. Frick yeah, it's inadequate. You just lost 2 firefighters, Newark. I understand that fighting shipboard fire is a low priority issue. However, you lost 2 firefighters. Do something to rectify this. The NTSB said its final report will be made public in about 2 weeks. So again, I just wanted to highlight this, how you can go about fighting fires differently. Understand, vehicle fires on board ships are really dangerous. These are 2 fires I have covered on this channel. One of them, Felicity Ace. Felicity Ace caught fire out at sea, eventually sank. You can see where the decks are clearly on the side of the vessel, where the burn marks are. You cause massive damage with the heat on this. When you're at sea, you're in a very difficult position to do anything. This is Fremantle Highway. She caught fire off the coast of Germany. One of the crew members died while abandoning the vessel. You can see the vessel was nearly gutted from the mid-deck up. Fortunately, they had a void deck without vehicles on it. That's the only thing that really saved this car carrier from the fire on board. She was actually brought into the Netherlands, and then the vessel was basically cut the top off the vessel and then towed to Asia to be rebuilt. But this shows you the extent of what can happen on board car carriers when we have fires. So a tale of 2 fires. I would think that in the United States, in many ports, they should be looking at the fire that just took place on board Delphine and sit there and say, that's the way we're going to fight car fires from now on. And we've had many examples here in the United States. City of Jacksonville dealt with a fire on board a car carrier and had several members of its crew suffer injuries because of opening up a space and allowing oxygen into it, and they got basically an explosion on board the vessel. I've looked at this quite extensively. I'll have a link up above for all the videos we've done that really connect you to car fires that we have looked at, and plus a few stories from G Captain that look at car carrier fires over the past few years. It is a dangerous, dangerous thing to transport vehicles, and electrical vehicles in particular become a major danger should they catch fire. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. You didn't enjoy this video. Nobody enjoyed this video. It's a horrible video. Two Newark firefighters died. I shouldn't have said that. I just get in the habit of saying that. My apologies. If you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until the next episode, Sal, signing off.